Hello, everyone joining us on the social media. Welcome to our panel on coaching conversation, the impact of psychology on coaching today. We're joined today by two lovely experts, Dr. Rachael Skews and Teija Silvova. Thank you for joining us here today, ladies. I'm going to start by give you just a little background of each our panel, then we can go right ahead into our discussion, and we will have a few minutes, around 10 minutes at the end of our panel for questions from the audience. So please, you are welcome to ask or write any comments on question on any of the platforms that you're watching, and we can see the questions directly at the end of our panel. Teija Silvova is a business psychologist. She's an executive coach. She's an executive and team coach. She has an over 20 years experience in professional development. She has a background in PCC coaching, leadership developer. She's also transitioned from spearheading recruiting initiative to passionately advocating for transformative essence of coaching. Her commitment to the field extends to shaping future coaches, as she is one of the trainers that I provide ICF accredited program with her partner. Dr. Rachael Skews is the founder of Cognitus Consulting. Rachael is chartered coaching psychologist. She's a prominent figure in coaching psychology. She's recognized internationally for her expertise in acceptance and commitment coaching, ACT. Dr. Skews seamlessly integrates her roles as speaker, author, advisor, and through her consulting company, the Cognitus Consulting, she offers not just coaching for individuals, she also offers consultancy for business, training in acceptance and commitment coaching, the ACC, and she has a lot of academic achievements that highlight her research that focuses not only on the empirical evidence on performance, development, and health-related coaching. So join me with welcoming these beautiful panelists, and let's dive into our lovely discussion panel today. How are you ladies today? Are you as excited as I am?
I am excited and a little bit nervous, if I'm being honest. I think it's a big topic we're talking about today. But thank you for having us. Thank you for hosting the conversation.
And thank you.
From myself, thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Oh, no, thank you. It's really fun. It's a topic I'm super interested in. And I think the two of you will just, shed very interesting light on the topic of how actually psychology does impact coaching and how it is important in our daily coaching conversations. What do you think,
Thank
Teija?
you also for inviting. I agree with Rachael. I'm excited. I'm also a bit cold because I'm located in Finland and it's -1 here. And I was checking that it was about 20 degrees more in Dubai and in London, some too. So yeah, we are scattered all over, but I'm happy to join you. Thank you for asking.
No, thank you for joining us. Thank you. So let me start by asking you, Teija, from your perspective as an executive coach, a psychologist, how do you think psychology adds the dimension to coaching conversation, in your opinion?
Okay, I'd like to go a bit backward, and I think that coaching has learned or developed from psychology in the first place. So if somebody is a coach, he or she is using psychology even without realizing it. A lot of psychological themes like learning, developing schemes, emotions, motivation, values, coaches learn to coach around those even without deeper knowledge of psychology. But if you ask that, how can somebody add value to the coaching by knowing more and knowing how to use psychology, I think that without psychology, it's easier to coach around what to do, solve problems, decide what should I do with this thing or things like that. things around doing. But then when you have psychological knowledge and techniques, you can coach around who and how, like about thinking, motivation, values, identity, which kind of makes the coaching more deep and maybe that way more effective too. And I don't think you need to be a psychologist to be a good coach. It can help, but even without that, when you learn good coaching techniques and become experienced and skilled in coaching, you can be good. You just use the best of psychology.
That's wonderful. And I can't agree more. It was born from this psychology coaching. And you did raise a valid point that if coaches do learn the behind the scenes, the deeper level, without being psychologists, they can actually enrich the coaching conversation and the coaching experience for their clients. Excellent. Anything you want to add, Rachel, to that, since you are the...
Well, I agree. I agree with what Teija is saying, in that I think being a psychologist is not enough to be a good coach. So I think that's the first thing to say. You have some excellent coaches who don't have a background in psychology. But I think what you tend to find is that when coaches explore psychology and the theories that it offers, the research that it offers, they find things that are very useful to them. I think part of it is we need to make sure it's accessible and it translates well. I was reading a paper, which I'm responsible for, and thinking to myself, is this accessible to people outside of academic work and outside of psychology? And so I think there's something there to make sure that psychology is available and easily kind of digestible for people who don't have a technical background. So that's the only bit that I would add. But otherwise, I think that was a very, a pretty full kind of view, which I very much share around the bedfellows. There's a lot of overlap.
Yes, but it's true, as you said, sometimes it's not really readily available if it's not for academic purposes, because usually these websites that provides the journals that you need, either you have an academy, like you're, registered with a university, or you have to pay for each research, and you're not sure if this is the research that actually is going to help you unless you buy it first. So I do agree, readily available would be awesome if that can be happen. Okay, so Rachel, we're going to stay here with you, and given your background as a chartered psychologist, can you tell us how you've seen the principles of psychology evolve or progress or adapt within the coaching field over the years in your experience?
So I think that's a really good question. So not all of psychology is going to be or feel relevant to what we do as coaching practitioners. There is work which, because I also trained as an occupational psychologist, some of that feels relevant to me. And some of it I haven't really looked at for a while because it hasn't cropped up in my coaching practice work. I would say that the things that do consistently feel like I'm drawing on them or using them are things around like human behavior, all of those sorts of things around humans, what works for us, the conditions in which we thrive, the way that we learn, or the way that we connect with each other, the things that make us really flourish in the workplace, for example. So that seems to crop up again and again for me. One of the big areas that I work with is what we would refer to in acceptance and commitment coaching as values. And I see this coming from lots and lots of different areas, both within psychology, but also in coaching. We might not use the same term, might not call it the same thing, but we're doing the same thing. So values is like the things that bring meaning and purpose to you as a human being, and thinking about whether or not you're connecting with that in your life. And that could be if you're coaching people in terms of their health, it might be showing up for them in the ways that they are living their life that connect with their health. But it doesn't sound like it's an immediately applicable thing in the workplace. But actually, I have very deep conversations with people exploring their values, both inside and outside of work, and how that is relating to their workplace performance or their leadership, or those various different things. So I think there's a lot that we learn from psychology about human behavior, and a lot of that really informs my practice as a coach. And I think it's where there's a lot of value from psychology as well. I think that's where we can all, as a community of coaches, take some valuable insights and be able to apply them in our practice.
I do agree. Like we see some values mentioned in the ICF core competencies, in the code of ethics, like even in the exam that we take to be accredited ICF, there's a lot of questions on these values, like concentrating on the client, not me as a coach, like what the client's values, insights, that's what's important in the coaching conversation. So I see what you're saying. Teija, would you like to add anything to this?
That's all interesting. And I think that the values are becoming more important nowadays when there's a lot of contradictions. But also I would add maybe motivation, that comes up always, and emotions. We Finns are not considered emotional people at all, but it doesn't mean that we wouldn't have them, and we would know how to manage them. And almost every coaching conversation I have, at some point the managing emotions come up, and that's very psychological. So I think that it's good to know some techniques how to help people to manage and cope with their emotions, and and maybe to explore their motivation, to direct their motivation.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that, just building on what Teija is saying now, because again, I very much agree. One of the things that I think psychology can be really useful for in our coaching practice is when there are psychological blocks. So it isn't the fact that somebody doesn't know how to move forward, or they don't know what they need to do, or there isn't this sort of, gap between knowledge. They've got the skills, they've got the knowledge, and they're still not moving forward. And quite often that can be because of a psychological block. I mean, you can have psychological blocks in there as well as, needing the skills and the knowledge. But I think being able to draw on our understanding of all of those things that we've talked about, values and motivation and, all of those different psychological things that could be part of the barrier to really achieving full potential. So I think psychology gives you an awful lot of insight around what that could be, and also ways, techniques to safely move forward.
And if I could add there also, we are very much agreeing on the topic, so we just are not contradicting, just adding each other. So I think that that's something that differentiates us coaches from, for example, psychologists who do therapy, because in therapy it's there's a lot of attention looking back and finding out why. But as coaches, even psychological coaches, we don't need to know everything about the past, and we don't need to understand why. We just accept it and go forward, so we can go around and or across those psychological barriers without knowing everything, why everything is like it is. So in a way, us coaches can be very therapeutic without doing the therapy, and that's available also for non-psychologist coaches. But it's good to know about, like you said, these psychological barriers and emotional blocks or topics like that, and be able to help your clients even deeper.
And I think it also will help to navigate that in a very ethical way. as well. Understanding what therapy looks and feels like in comparison to having a coaching conversation. And they are different. And when I'm teaching coaches, we do spend quite a lot of time exploring what the difference is, you know, and where is that edge, especially because I do quite a lot of work around mental health coaching. And so, you know, where is the sort of ethical boundary of what we might bring into a coaching session, and when we might say to a coachee, you know, there are other professionals who've got that training who might be beneficial for you to take this forward with, that might not be appropriate for the work that we're doing. So I think, and again, you know, Nancy, you mentioned about ICF and the other coaching bodies that people might be aligned with. We all know as coaches that ethical practice is really important. And so having that extra knowledge from psychology around helping you to navigate those boundaries, I think is very helpful.
And about those ethics, it's great that we don't need to diagnose anybody, and we shouldn't, and we can't. So we can just offer, as coaches, we can offer insights or explore topics. And if the client doesn't want to or don't feel it's relevant, then we can just move on. So in a way, it's so much more ethical to me, what we are doing as coaches.
I do love that. The bit you talked about, Teija and Rachel, about having that boundaries and when we can cross and when we can't, because you know, coaches, even if they read a lot about psychology and empirical researches and all that, there's still out there sometimes clients that need a professional psychologist, especially like if they have a really maybe clinical depression or whatever, and coaches need to learn to know when this person is beyond my help or where and I can help them or support with other psychologists. I think this is like an important, because sometimes you see that bends right now, because when you go to the social media, you see there is sometimes like it goes overlap, like when do the coach says it's not what I can do, it's someone else. Or sometimes, as you said, Teija, the client doesn't prefer to go to psychology, but at least acknowledging, and if the coach knows and they can help that client, then I can see like the transparency and the ethics where we have to hold ourselves with.
And I think it is helpful for us as coaches to be able to navigate that in the room, because the coachee is just going to come with what they come. You know, they are not going to know, or they may have a internal mindset of what they can and can't bring. So again, being able to contract really effectively with coaches, either at the beginning of a session or the beginning of a relationship, or even in the moment, you know, being able to effectively contract around these kinds of things, I think it really adds a lot of strength and safety to the working relationship that you have with your coaches.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I can't agree more, to be honest. I told like this is one of the most interesting topics. Okay, so let's dive a little bit deeper. This question I'm just gonna ask you, like both of you at the same time, and you can, you know, intervene whenever you feel like it. So we were talking about the boundaries and how we can, you know, as a coach, we need to navigate the coaching direction and know when the boundaries and our ethics needs to kick in. So how can we ensure that the coaching conversation maintain an empowering and forward-focused? Even when sometimes we had to go deep into psychological layers that, you know, as you said, like usually coaches tend to be in the present and the future, not a lot on the past. So how can we navigate that when something like that happens?
I can talk about this from the perspective of the work that I do. So I use and I'll do it as well because the framework that I use in coaching actually was a therapeutic framework. I mean, a lot of coaching approaches that many of us will be familiar with, solution focused, positive, you know, all of these different cognitive behavioral, a lot of the, not all coaching approaches, but many have got their roots in therapeutic practices. So what I did, my research, I look at acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a clinical approach, but within the kind of underlying philosophy of it, you see people as just in distress, that there isn't anything kind of wrong or broken with them. And so it kind of moves against the main paradigm that we have in psychology for a long time, which has been that, you know, there is something wrong with you if you have a mental health problem. And I see mainstream psychology moving away from that in general and more into this idea of, you know, people are just struggling. And part of the reason that they might be struggling is because of the way that we've evolved, the way that we think, the culture or the context that we might find ourselves in. And so one of the things I feel is very powerful for coaching is that we can step in those moments where somebody might be struggling and use these tools before, you know, somebody gets to a much more higher level of need where a clinical intervention is going to be more appropriate. So the kinds of things that I might be doing with somebody is having conversations about what's going on for them in the here and now, like really getting in touch with what are the thoughts and feelings that they might be experiencing, as well as the goals that they want to achieve. That's, you know, that's the real kind of North Star. Where do you want to be? And thinking about that in relation to what's really meaningful and important to you. So that's what I mean by values. You know, that's the kind of, and so we try and bring all of that into the room. It's a lot. It's always a lot. You'll know that from your own work. And so a lot of the time the coachees will be, they could be going quite deep in places. In fact, some of my coachees, I work with leaders in organizations. One of them was recently reflecting on a link that he had made about his own childhood and his dynamic within, you know, his family, and how he could see that was sort of playing out in the workplace. Now, unlike a clinical, you know, therapeutic intervention, you know, it's in the room with us, but it's not the topic. So we're actually saying, oh, yeah, that's really interesting. There will be things like that in the room with you when you are, you know, talking to your team or, you know, trying to influence the way that the business is moving forward. So within the practice that I have, the difference between the clinical kind of approach is perhaps the domain. It's definitely the level of intensity, the kind of, you know, how strong those negative feelings might be. But I kind of feel like apart from that, it's the same clay, you know, that we're working with, because it's a human being, it's a person. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It was actually, because, yeah.
One thing I will say is I've noted down that phrase, which I really love, which she said, which is going deep but going forward. I think that's a really fantastic description for actually work that I feel that we do as coaches.
Lovely. Yes, because that's the essence of me. That's how I see the essence of coaching, is just sometimes acknowledging whatever happened in the past, like it happened, I can't change it, but what is under my control? And as you said, staying in the present and focusing on what I can do today and I can do tomorrow to achieve the goals that links to my values.
Yeah, and one more thought that before I pass over to Teija, my partner in purpose, as I sometimes have my colleagues. Within acceptance and commitment coaching and therapy, one of the things that's really important is actually taking action. So you might be thinking a certain way, but what's really going to get you moving forward is taking action, and that behavioral experimentation, which I think is a core part of nearly all coaching approaches, but not necessarily a core part of all therapeutic approaches. You know, actually getting people out there, trying new things, being willing to kind of take a little bit of a leap into the unknown. You know, that's a really core part of the work that I do, which I think is not necessarily there in all therapeutic approaches. But I mean, Teija, you might feel differently. You might be like, well, Rachel, I'm not entirely sure about that. But that's a good moment for me to hand over, I think.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't feel very differently. I just want to add on thoughts, which there are several, but I try to remember all of them. So often they say that it depends how much energy the client has, whether it's good case for coaching or therapy. But usually the clients that come to us, they have some kind of energy. But I have noticed that sometimes they come and in the beginning they may be worn out. So then my role as a coach is to concentrate on their strengths, have them make a plan how to add their energy, add things that add the energy and remove the way of thinking or doing that takes away their energy so they can build up their strength. So although I'm a business coach and they are business leaders, the focus is some kind of in life coaching and health coaching and how to manage your stress and gain your energy. A special case comes to my mind that people in this organization, they had really tough couple of years because of the former leader, and then the CEO was changed and the board was sent into coaching. So maybe 3-4 sessions were building up their strength and have them regain it. And my role was to encourage. But then it shifted. They started doing that. And like you, Rachel, said, that they took action, which they planned. And I pushed a little bit. And then when they gained their energy, then I could challenge them. And then the energy shifted and my role shifted. I was still encouraging, but more also challenging them to make changes around them in their work, communicating more bravely, a lot of different things. So I think that even with one same person, the role of the coach can change according to what kind of place he or she is in her life or in her business. There was something else, but I forgot it all already. So
It all comes up, don't worry. But I do like when you said the story and what just Rachel said, I felt like I've seen an example of how psychology impacted coaching. Because as Rachel said, it's behavioral, because at the end you get them to do things, which is because usually behavior is the now, and the thoughts and feelings, they could be in the future, the past, they could be anywhere. But the behavior, like what I do now, is the present and the moving forward. So from this story and what this Rachel, we just witnessed an example of how psychology impacted coaching. Don't you guys agree? I felt that like when I was listening to the story and talking to Rachel.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Okay. I love this conversation. I'm just going to keep saying that until the end. Okay. So after this lovely example, and my insight, it was useful for me as well. So what is the most, let's say, significant, it doesn't have to, like, whatever psychology theory, principle, or any tool that actually helped you to inform your coaching practices from psychology? That could, the coach can take away a tip for today, for example, and they can use it in their practice as well. Like me.
Do you want to leap in first? Or
I can. I can.
I know I pick up a lot of airtime, so I have to try.
Yeah. Okay, Teija, the mic is yours.
Okay. So I think that what I use most is that the theory of schemes, that we all have our mental maps and we can change them. So we do that as coaches. We help people to change their mental maps so that something they want and need and are their goals become easier. So if they come with an obstacle and they say that I can't, then we as coaches can ask that, but when was the time that you were able to do that, and what was the case you succeeded in that? So the coachee has a mental map of succeeding and doing well, and then we just ask her or him to transfer it into the situation that he has the obstacle with. And it's like magic that then it seems that they go over the obstacle and realize that, okay, but I have strengths and I was able to do that, and I did it like this and this and this. And then they will explain how it will go when they use their strengths or the past things that helped them to succeed in the past. And when they start talking about how they will do it well and how they will succeed, it already starts creating the new mental maps of succeeding, which is this mental coaching and building these mental maps. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. But Rachel, what will you say?
Well, I think I've already talked about the first thing, which is so obvious, which is the acceptance and commitment coaching. So that's the main form of coaching that I use in my practice. Not the only one. It's not the only one I'm trained in either, but it is the one that I tend to lean towards. And I train a lot of other people in it as well. So I'm fairly well known for my connection to acceptance and commitment coaching. But I won't bore everyone by talking about that anymore. I have actually it popped into my head when you asked the question, what is the thing that has influenced my coaching the most apart from acceptance and commitment coaching? And I think it's something I hope everybody would be familiar with, and that's evidence-based practice. So rather than it being a particular tool or technique, it's like a philosophy or an approach behind what you're doing. Which I think I would say is really fundamental to the work that I do and the way that I try to kind of influence everybody, my students, my clients, my colleagues. I'm a bit of an evangelist. What evidence-based practice is, it's very simple. It's just this idea of, thinking about whether or not what you're doing is effective and whether or not it's safe to use. And all that means is that, sometimes we can be prone to moving towards fads and things like that. You see a lot of this, I've come up with this new way of coaching. And I understand why people do it. And it isn't a bad thing, because we do want to move our field forward. What we do, it's very new in terms of, human interactions. Coaching is a newer thing than some other things. But if you're not willing to test it and show that it is effective and that it's safe, then I'm a little bit skeptical, and I wouldn't tend to recommend approaches. If people are saying to me, is this good training, or is this a good way of coaching? If it doesn't have that evidence behind it, something that just secures it in some way, shape or form, I'm a little bit hesitant. That's where I sit with it. And also, as beyond my individual practice, as somebody within the coaching community and a researcher, what I try to do is to contribute to what we know about coaching, about what we know is safe and what we know works. So the research that I've done is around, acceptance and commitment coaching, and showing it's got these positive benefits on well-being and performance and people's self-efficacy and their goal attainment. We've been able to show that. So I think the one thing we haven't talked about yet is the importance of psychological research and being able to lean into that, even if we haven't got coaching specific studies. If you are using a psychologically informed technique from a therapeutic practice, you're probably going to be able to feel a little bit more confident that it's been tested. I think supervision is really important to help us to make sure that we're applying that appropriately as well. So I think we haven't talked about the way that coaches can use research that's coming out of psychology to inform their practice, because we have our own research communities and they are growing and they are maturing, and it's really exciting. But we also have a fellow discipline which we can lean into as and when we want to learn more about the different things that we might be borrowing and adapting and taking from psychology.
I hear you. But at the same time, you can see like the last few years that, for example, ICF is trying to encourage research-based studies from our coaches, and but as you said, still it's a baby compared to psychology and philosophy.
But there's some benefits to being young and being as reflective as we are. We know within psychology research, it's very fallible. Human beings produce research and they are fallible. So we have replication problems. We take studies, we do them I'm in the UK, the way that somebody thinks or feels or acts or responds may not be the same all over the world. And so studies done within certain cultures might need replicating outside of those cultures for us to be, really confident that that is something that is true about human beings. So I'm not saying psychology produces perfect research. Far, far, far from it. Human beings are complex. We're difficult to study. I always say to people, psychology is one of the hardest sciences to be part of, because what you're studying is so complex. And, how do we know how people are thinking and feeling except by asking them? So, we have a very dynamic and complex subject matter. And I think learning from each other, cross-discipline, there are things that we will be able to do as a research community to avoid some of the problems that the main discipline of psychology, they're having to work through a lot of that.
Okay.
Then in the, for example, ICF, which is one of the biggest maybe coaching organizations, in their web pages, there are results of these wonderful studies. So we don't need to do the studying and researching all by ourselves. There's a lot of good stuff available, and it's good to educate yourself. Then the problem is that when there's this study, then we have to translate it into the language that our clients or the people who buy the coaching, which is the leaders, understand, because then we translate it into the numbers and return of investment and talk their language. So as a coaches, it depends where do you do coaching, but especially as an independent coach who also does the selling, there's different languages you communicate in based on who you talk with. So yeah.
Wonderful. So I can this is like what I was thinking when you ladies were talking. Like, yes, there is a lot of empirical research, but it's just not everybody can access that. And at the same time, as you said, Teija, because not a lot of body is coming from a psychological background, they may misinterpret the research. And the client or the coaches may not understand what's going on at the same time. And using the simple language can help with making it more practical. And I guess this is where it comes in, the coaches with psychology backgrounds who can help other coaches. And that's why it's interesting when you mentioned to have a supervision, maybe a supervisor or a mentor who can help a coach with these things. That would be beneficial for them as well, I guess.
Yeah. And I think this is it, just going back to that idea of almost like a cross-fertilization. If you have coaches with psychology backgrounds, they're going to have some skills, but we are going to lack others. And so I think that's one of the things I love the most about the community, and especially the international coaching community, is that we offer so much to each other. There's a richness, and there should continue to be that openness. I don't think the conversation today, any of us are suggesting psychology has got it right and we should be following, it's part of what we have available to us, and it's very beneficial, but it's not perfect. And there needs to be that translation.
And also there's a lot of tools available. Even if you're not a psychologist, there's a very effective and good tools to use borrowed from different fields like time management or neuro leadership or neuropsychology or positive psychology or
Emotional intelligence.
mindfulness techniques. So you can have your own toolkit and learn to use them in different places or offer them for clients if they want to explore around your tools and and not be very knowledgeable in psychology, but still be able to use these tools.
So yeah, I guess to be always on the learning mindset, like be always ready to learn, be open to new techniques. And I think maybe if I want to add something, it's just understanding that not one shoe fit everybody.
Yeah.
And that's where the different tools that you suggested actually help sometimes. If a coach is knowledgeable in different fields, they can help clients differently, depending on what they actually need.
That's actually explicitly part of the evidence-based practice model. The client and the practitioner are both in there because there's going to be needs that your clients have, which may not be the same as everybody else. And similarly, you as a practitioner have experience and expertise and skill, which is unique to you and your judgment of a situation. So all of that is as important as the things that might be going on outside. So the external research and, the different tools or the different approaches. I think when coaching's done really well, I think it's like it's more of an art. It is an art, isn't it? I've been talking a lot about science. I was reflecting with another colleague about how much it's a combination of art and science, all brought together, our understanding of people and our ability to create a space and work with them and kind of journey with them for the period of time that you're working together.
Yeah, if somebody has an insight or the coach uses her intuition, is it psychology or magic or art? Maybe all of them.
All of them. It is. It's really. I think we're probably all a little bit biased in this room, but I do think it's like it is a very magical process that you can go on with people.
Yes. Okay, excellent. So let us just end with this last note, and so we can move up to the Q&A questions. And I guess like the last things the bit that we said, I see that psychology can empower the coaching conversation for coaches everywhere. And instead of seeing it as distinct, as you said, Teija, that we can benefit from other fields. And as you said, Rachel, the empirical evidence sometimes give you the more confidence in your coaching process. Anything you ladies want to add before we move on to the Q&A?
There's a lot, but we won't have time for that. So it's time for other conversation.
Next time we'll do 2 hours. So we can talk about a lot of things. Okay, so one of the questions are, let me just check, where does the borderline between coaching and psychology lie? And I think we touched this a little bit, but if we can, if one of you can take this one. How do you make sure that coaching doesn't enter the field of psychology?
That's a really
boundary, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think if we're talking about psychology, I'm going to assume that the question is talking about more of the clinical psychology work, because we know psychology can be applied in lots of different ways: education, occupational work, health. So there's lots of different ways of applying it, exactly the same as there is with coaching. We get coaching within all of those different fields. But if we're talking about clinical psychology, it's a really good question, and I don't know if I would necessarily advocate for there being one very clear line. But having said that, I feel confident in my practice that I can see the line when it's there. But But when I do a lot of training for coaches, both, very experienced coaches and people who are just starting out on their journey as a professional coach or whatever their context might be. And so we talk about this, and I always think there is a bit of grey area, in my opinion. How do you make sure that you don't enter into the grey? I think that's contracting. I think that is really strong contracting at the beginning to say, I think I contract something along the lines of, there may be moments where things come into the coaching conversation which might be better for you to explore in another form, and that isn't just about somebody's clinical need. It might also be an educational need that they need. There's so many times that people expect a lot from a coach, and it is really flattering. I always say that to people, I really love that you think I'm capable of helping with so many different things. But there will be outside experts who are more appropriate for you to work with. And so what I say in my contracting is, if those moments occur, we'll talk about it, and that's what we do. Being able to contract with your coachee, because it could be that they are just bringing it in for context for you, but actually, it's not something that they feel too triggered by, or too, it's not something that they feel so stuck with that it's, it's really kind of clinical or distressed by. Those are the sorts of things. I think there are some quite obvious signs. If people are getting very distressed, then, those are the moments where you might say, I wonder if part of your self-care should be that you explore this with someone who is trained to explore it safely with you. That kind of thing. So that's my terrible response to a very good question.
No, it's not. But if you think about it, it's about transparency with the client. It's about engaging the client or the coachee with the process, partnering with them. And this is the essence of coaching, like bringing them in the conversation and let them decide, because they do have the power to decide for themselves, and they know what they need and they can have that choice. And as you said, it's a gray area, and the coach has the power to choose where that boundary is depending on their values and the ethics they follow. What do you think, Teija? Or do we go to the second?
I agree. And there's another question. So let's move on.
Yeah. Do you think, because you mentioned positive psychology, Teija, do you think positive psychology has had any significant, perhaps pervasive impact on coaching?
Yes. Yeah, I think coaching is built on positive psychology, but also maybe it depends what type of coaching you do. You may have niche or back ideology, like if you are transactional coach or health coach or business coach, or your theory is existential, or there's a lot of them. But I think that because of coaching is about finding people's strengths and building their courage, and attitude is how to move forward. And also the idea is that when we talk about things as they were and they will be happening, it's already starting to build the mind map. So I think the coaching principles are built on positive psychology.
Yes.
I'm also going to add that I think there's a lot going the other way as well. So I think coaching has been asking of psychology, what about, yes, people can be very distressed, but there's also a lot of meaning and purpose in our lives. And there's a lot of things that, people are reaching for and aspiring to, that we see when we're coaching, that perhaps is not so clear in the clinical world, or it just, I think it arrives differently. I think it presents differently. So not only do I think positive psychology has had a very significant impact on coaching, I think coaching's having a very significant impact on positive psychology and the kinds of interventions that we might do, or the sorts of ways that we might work with people. I think it's both.
Yeah, for example, in Finland, there's these psychologists who work in clinical field. They come to learn coaching skills, to learn better questions, so that they can help their practice to be more client centered and client led. So there's influence back and forth. We can teach something to clinical psychologists and vice versa.
Okay. I always thought that coaching came from positive psychology. So this was a little bit enlightening because maybe the school I did was about positive psychology. So it's interesting. Okay, another question. Will coach work effectively and bring result if a person hasn't worked their psychological problems with the specialist first? Interesting.
That is a really interesting question. And I have direct experience that I'm going to bring to this because it will depend on what the goal is. So I've worked with clients where I would answer yes to that question. That I would say the coaching can't be effective and bring results if somebody hasn't worked through some of their psychological problems. That the anger in this instance in the room was so kind of strong that it was very difficult to move beyond that, this sense of righteousness and I have been wronged. And this was workplace stuff.
Wow.
So very powerful. So in that instance, I would say it was very difficult to be effective, have an effective conversation, because of course somebody's got to be open to you having that clinical kind of conversation. However, I've also had experiences working with coaches where the outcome of the coaching is they felt ready to have a clinical conversation. They felt ready to go to therapy and in fact said openly, I don't think I could have done this otherwise. And so I think it does depend. For me, the perspective I have is I think the client's journey is whatever works for the client. So sometimes you go in, they've got a goal and the goal evolves or shifts or changes. Not always, but sometimes. And so I would put that in that box really and kind of say, if you've got a coachee who comes in, they want to achieve something in their life. Again, that was a career conversation. I'm getting my K's all mixed up. That was a career coaching conversation. And what was being explored was more existential. What was being uncovered became very existential. And so, we talked about the need for the benefits as well of exploring that and, really looking after yourself. That if you're carrying these kinds of emotional things around with you, having a space where you can kind of explore them and have that self-compassion and the, compassion from the therapist, it could be really transformational for people. So that's my answer to that one. Really good question.
Okay.
I'm trying to think, is there a problem that wouldn't be a psychological? Isn't all the problems somehow psychological?
They often do have that psychological element, don't they, Teija? You're absolutely right.
Yeah. So I think that acknowledging that, then when you are in coaching, it's just a different way you go about those problems, which may be different ways psychological. So I would say yes, coaching can work effectively.
Oh, but I love that how you said like all problems is actually, it is true if you think about it. And it does, coaching comes from psychology in some way. When you are both a coach and a psychotherapist and psychologist, is it still important to draw boundaries around getting into clinical work when you are specifically coaching? I say yes, but go ahead, guys, answer.
Teija, what do you reckon?
Well, I don't do psychotherapy and I don't do therapy, but people have said that my coaching has been therapeutic. So, and I think that when people get their stress released or get insights or find answers, of course it's therapeutic. But the person who does both, I think coaching techniques will blend in. and they will, for example, this one psychologist, a therapist who came into our coaching studies, said that she wouldn't have had enough tools without our coaching course, but with the great questions she learned to ask, she has very effective tools to help her clients who come to seek the clinical psychologist's help. So yeah, I think the client is the boundary line is clear when you are therapist, but when you are coach, it's just question of ethics and your methods.
I agree. And the only thing that I would add is that point around contracting. So I know quite a lot of people who do both. And just as a slight aside, I did some research looking at coaches and what they would want from training. And I had a therapist who said, why would I need coach training when I've got therapeutic training? Which I found a little bit, I was quite taken aback, and I thought, well, they're not the same. You're not doing the same thing. So to believe that you don't need to have, training on what the difference is and, how you might, what you might do differently. I was a little bit uncomfortable with that. So I think that for me is, a really good sign that we do need to just be, it's a being a therapist, being a psychologist is great. You have a fantastic skill set, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be a great coach because you don't necessarily have that training. So I think if you have the training in both, being able to make sure that you just ethically contracting, don't start doing therapy when you've contracted for coaching. But then a therapist might say, well, I use a lot of coaching conversations and coaching techniques in my therapeutic practice. So I suppose that's an interesting, but I think from the coaching side, if you've contracted with somebody that you're coaching, then, if you have the skill set to provide therapy and the opportunity arises, then you can contract around that. As well, I think there is now quite a common, especially within mental health coaching, where somebody might be working with more than one practitioner at a time. So they might have a coach and they might have a therapist or a psychiatrist. So I think it's becoming more common to have both relationships happening at the same time. And so there's more arguments around that and more complexity to explore than we have time, unfortunately. But an interesting example of the two kind of running parallel together.
But that's why organizations like ICF would help you with this one. Like this one, it would tell you to have two contracts, one for psychology and one for coach, and to know when you're using your session as a psychologist or using it as a coach, so that it will be it will be clear and transparent for you and the coachee at the same time. If during coaching session the client got triggered by something and ended up in a trauma, how to bring him, her out of there? Are there any tools a coach can use? Okay, that's I think from a personal experience, I feel this question that happened.
Yeah, it hasn't happened to me in a coaching session. I have had some students when I've been doing training sessions who have found the content quite emotive. And so again, being able to make sure you're keeping safe spaces for people is really important, especially when we do coach training as well. I think being able to kind of create a safe environment for people, we haven't really talked about that, but I think that's part of this too. For me, one of the things that I will often do is anchor them and make sure that I'm creating a very safe space for them, give them the option of either talking about it or, if they would prefer not to talk about it. It might be the point where I talk about whether or not a therapeutic relationship would be valuable to them. It might also be an opportunity. I use mindfulness in my practice, and so we may do a really brief mindfulness anchoring exercise, body and breath awareness, something like that. I think there's lots of tools that we can use. And also, again, I'm just going to hark back to evidence-based practice, making sure that the tools you're using in your practice are less likely to kind of trigger people traumatically, or that if you do get that kind of response through the training and supervision, you've covered what you might be able to do to help people as well. So there's support for all of us as practitioners in the training and supervision that we have available.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's hard to say which is trauma, but I suppose if somebody is showing intense emotions, then you can think that, okay, is this something? We've been discussing this individual coaching, but when you do team coaching, it's often there that whatever you do, somebody will have some kind of emotions, anger, or start crying, or something unexpected. And it's often good to have two coaches, especially if the team is a bit bigger, so that the other one can discuss with the person, maybe take her aside, and then the other one can continue with the team or group. So, but I would say that the recognizing the emotion and accepting it, and then, like Rachel, you said, anchoring, doing different techniques, but just to discuss, have the person name it and discuss about it, sometimes takes the scare away or intensity away.
And what about the coaches themselves? I think they should also have like not to be involved too much into the process and be sucked in that, as you said, whatever the trauma meant. It could be anything.
I think the other thing is, you know, I have mentioned supervision, but more specifically, coaching is emotional labor. You know, we're creating a space for clients, we're going on that journey with them, and it's a lot of us bringing ourselves to those sessions when we're doing it well, and when we're doing it, you know, in a really effective way. So never neglect your own self-care and the things that you can do, that community around you. You know, everybody who's on this call is part of the coaching community. We all are. And, you know, having supervision, having sessions like this, CPD sessions, where we're kind of talking about things that are relevant for us. All of that is so important for us as practitioners. I'm a bit evangelical about that one. So.
And maybe another psychological tool to add, as we are as psychologists or coaches teaching emotion management. I manage my emotions when with a client I become angry or scared, and both have happened. So I need to use these techniques to kind of calm myself down, and then after a bit maybe use that as a tool that, okay, if I sense things like that, I assume that people around this client experience the same, and often I can use my own reactions to help him to understand how people interpret his behavior or react around him, and that has been a good tool. So breathing and mindfulness and relaxing to control your own emotions.
Breathing, we shouldn't underestimate just the power of taking a breath, you know.
Yes. And these are very lovely tools to end our panel today. Mindfulness, breathings, techniques. There's a lot of there that coaches can reach. The emotional management, which may include emotional intelligence or another two that can be used. Thank you very much, lady. This was very insightful and was really lovely for me. And I've learned quite a few stuff. So I hope other coaches listening in or other psychologists learned with us as well. It was very insightful. Thank you, Teija, and thank you, Rachel. Is there anything you want to say as an end note, or should we just say bye-bye? We love everybody.
The only thing I want to say is thank you for the questions. They were really, really good, really quite challenging and tricky questions. So again, something really rich about when we all come together as a community. I think we all get a lot from it. I know I have. Thank you for inviting me to be part
Well,
of it.
thank you, Rachel, and thank you,
Thank
Teija.
you, Rachel. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, all the listeners.
And we have one of the audiences sharing. Thank you for sharing your experiences and insight. Thank you, Taslim. We hope that you had fun. Thank you. Thank
We
you,
did.
everybody. And have a good night or day. I'm not sure what time you have.